Here we are today talking about the Fool. Here's the Gentle Tarot. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of hard to see. Okay, there you go. And then we have the traditional Rider Waite, right? Yes, excited. Okay. Lovely Rebecca presents her pulled this
Mm.
for us. So even though she's not with us, she is with us.
Oh, I've got the Thoth. Hold
Oh,
on.
good. Yeah, please show that.
Thanks to you.
Yeah. I
Hold
know
on,
I
give
had
me.
secret. I was like, you're gonna have to use like this is actually part of the work we do. So
Ulterior motives, I see.
yeah, exactly.
It's like when you give your sister the dress that you want to wear so you can
Right.
borrow
Yeah.
it from her.
So I'm gonna borrow that
Yeah,
one day.
exactly.
So this will be card number one, right?
Zero,
Hold on.
which is appropriate too. That zero, I think, plays
There we
actually
go.
quite a bit into the interpretation.
Oh
My
wow, that looks like a proper superhero
I know.
situation.
Yeah. What's around? What's all the kind of tubes or the circles around him? I wonder what that is. There's a sun right on his crotch. That's interesting.
and then something there in the distance too. I can give a little read on what it says.
Sure.
Mm.
The Fool. In spiritual matters represents ideas and thoughts which endeavor to transcend earth. In material matters reveals folly, eccentricity, even mania. It represents a sudden, unexpected impulse.
And then I have because I have it too. And then this other part of it also says the fool is air or vacuum or recent innocence. I don't know if I said that correctly. He holds the male element of fire, the female element of water, the sword of air, and the disc of earth. He is the green man of spring, the great fool of the Celts, Dalua, and Parsifal. Apologies for the pronunciations there. He is also Zeus, Dionysus, and Bacchus, and Baphomet. That's a lot of people to be.
Yeah, it's that is a lot of people to be. A lot of gods to beat.
I really love this book because this woman, I don't know, she I think her interpretations are really thorough and good. She talks about how the fool is actually like the enlightened person, but from the external, right, the outside view of the world, whereas the universe is the enlightened person, but from their own perspective, like from the inner view of themselves. So I thought that was interesting that the fool looks to the world, to the outside world, looks like a fool. The enlightened person looks like a fool, and then to oneself, there's more cohesion and coherence, and from that inner perspective. So
this is this is something that kind of comes up a lot in my readings. I think it's Gene Key 61, and I'm looking at it right now, which would correlate with hexagram 61. And yeah, the shadow of it is psychosis. The gift is inspiration, and the siddhi is sanctity. And when Richard Rudd talks about this, when he talks about how people that are kind of in that psychotic state from our perspective, it's actually divine. And in a lot of cultures, they actually like, you know, they saw these people as closer to God because they were experiencing these kinds of things. So it's only recent that people that, experience mania or kind of like have those kinds of, I don't know, um, disposition are actually closer to the sacred in that, interpretation. So I always like that because it's in my gene keys, and I suffer from a fear of being, put in an asylum for being psychotic or coming up with crazy ideas, which is why I always feel like I have to science the shit out of my astrology in order to be like, I'm not, you know, finding patterns where they aren't. So anyway, yeah, that's a big theme for me.
yeah, I appreciate you saying that. There's like in when I was studying anthropology, they talked about the thin line between psychosis and like being a shaman. Like a lot of times those people were identified as shamans in the society, and rather than being outcasted like they kind of are in our modern culture, they were taken in, and that energy was then learned how to, it's like taming a stallion, the energy was
Mm.
actually appreciated. and then worked with. And then I worked, I worked at a mental hospital for a year, and yeah, it was there were a lot of moments of working with people where they would say sometimes the most profound, like it's like, oh my God, I've never heard something just so divine, and it just felt like such wisdom. But then they'd immediately like, then go into like, Donald Trump is my father, and I was at the birth of Christ, and so like, their ability to actually ground in reality and the structure of reality was really challenging. But they were also connected to they were downloading something that was clearly from source, but there's no way that that was getting like nurtured in that kind of setting where they were basically, there was no windows, weren't able to go outside for very long, and then they were just drugged the hell out of. So you know sort of pretty sad situation.
Well, just to add to that, there is in that reflection the movement from psychosis to kenosis, which is this term about allowing the sacred to come through. And I sense that maybe, you got to tune into the right channel. And so while things are coming through, it might be AM 540 that's coming through, if they've got their, antennas out for the wrong thing. So I think that's kind of like what distinguishes between that psychosis and the kenosis is awareness, and just, I am allowing something to come through as opposed to whatever wants to come through comes through.
I read a quote one time that was like the schizophrenic drowns in this psychosis, whereas the wise one knows how to swim, like, so. And again, like that's been a theme for us, learning to swim, right? So it's like you're saying, it's that awareness and that capability to act. I think again back to like taming a stallion, where the stallion isn't like overwhelming and running over you, but you're learning to channel it and move it and work with it.
Makes me want to read Dostoevsky's The Idiot again. It was I read it last when I was in school, which is too long ago. And so I can't really remember it, but it's the same. I mean, the title is The Idiot, but it's basically the Christ figure as well, that is identified as the idiot. And I remember it was a book that hooked me to Dostoevsky. I was madly in love with Dostoevsky. So I should really read that again.
Do you remember the arc of the story?
I don't. I just remember the character because he was so beautifully portrayed. And it was basically, I think, what you were saying, how people who are so well adjusted to life are not actually at all well adjusted to life with a capital L.
This makes me think of something I think I heard Bonnie say once, that if we were like in this absolute, like, I don't know what the word is, but like immersion or connection with, I don't know if it's the sacred or this thing that the fool sees beyond, then our whole life will go in an instant, right? Like if you're in that state constantly, you don't have a life on earth really. So I think that's also interesting, like how maybe part of being human is just some sort of knowledge that sacred exists, but being there all the time means not being here. And how do you reconcile those and navigating those? Makes me think what the fool wants. Does he want to like? Maybe that's why he just likes playing games. He's just like, I'm just gonna fuck with everyone because I can see a lot going on.
Well, the tarot card, because Jordan uses it as the drawing of his first rule in his second book.
Yeah.
Nice.
And he points out, and I think it's on the Right Away for Real as well, that the dude is about to step off a cliff because he's looking to heaven. And there's a story about a philosopher, I forget his name, that did actually fall in a ditch because he was looking at the stars, and then whoop, he fell in a ditch. So it's that thing of navigating the here and now in the presence of the eternity or the eternal, and that how difficult that is. That seems to be in the card. He speaks of a different type of fool, though. He speaks of because Isa, when you were speaking, I thought like maybe, and we talk of the unseen because sometimes there's a fool at the end as well, but maybe that's exactly right. There should be the fool at the beginning and the fool at the end, and the fool at the end is the one who's lost to this world, maybe completely. That's the idiot, the fool at the end. And then he speaks of being willing to be a fool in the sense of trying something that you haven't tried before, being new at something. And I don't know if I told you guys, I know I told John himself, but the first weekend that I attended this dialectic practice of theirs was now 3 years ago, I think, almost. Well, July it would be 3 years ago. I afterwards, not the night, but the next day, I spoke to a colleague of mine about it, and I was so overwhelmed that luckily I was working from home, that I just started crying as soon as I stopped speaking with him. And then I had to go take a shower. I just had to feel like I had to shower. And as I was stepping into the shower, you know that voice in your head, which is not a voice? She was very clear. And she told me, you leveled up. And then I stopped crying because it makes sense, right? You're used to being the master. If you play on one level and you get to the top of the level, you're used to knowing what you're doing, being good at what you're doing, having mastered that level. But as soon as you level up, you're at the bottom. And it sucks being at the bottom. You know nothing. You don't have a clue what you're doing. And that's what I experienced. And that's why it was so overwhelming for me that weekend. I sensed that I leveled up and was a beginner. And that's the fool he refers to, the beginner. But being willing to be a fool, because otherwise you don't level up.
Yeah, it reminds me, actually, I have a sound bite from Jordan Peterson where he says something like, you have to be bad at something first. And just like Kermit the Frog. I put that to my gardening because I had no idea what to do. And still to this day, I don't know what to do. But every time I just have another day of doing it, it's something, momentum, keeping your eye on the bigger picture. Of course, you always have to look down at some point, otherwise you might fall off the cliff. But I think that it's really important too to have that, bigger picture of the whole journey, and that somehow is connected with, to me, that kind of divine, sacred, mystical realm that we're not capable of being in touch with from here. There's that siren.
That reminds me a few different things that maybe are connected. The first is this thing about being a beginner. So I remember Ivan Illich, he opened this Spanish school, language school in Mexico, and then all these bunch of philosophers and people went there, and they were like, why did you open a language school out of all things? And his answer was like, no, people needed to feel like children again, and being in a position where you don't know even how to communicate, you don't know how to express, you don't have those fancy words that are like already, jumping out of you, terminology and things. He says that's necessary. Like that was the only way, or the best way, I guess, that he saw that people could be humbled and also become resourceful. Because that's the thing about being a beginner too, is that if you're a beginner but you're also not expecting things to be handed down to you, then that's also an interesting position to be able to carve out without too many consequences. I remember having a lot of professors say this, like, it's a good thing that you're just a student because you can do whatever weird shit you want and it doesn't matter. You can explore without too many consequences. You're not expected to have like this final perfect product. So it's interesting, and I think he was saying that he feels like that's quite lacking in society now. Like there's very few spaces where you can be humbled like that. And it's very rarely encouraged. So that's one thing that came up. And the other thing that came up when you're talking about momentum, Sarah, is I just finished reading a book about improv. And it's really interesting. I mean, he talks a lot about different things and how really improv is not really improv, but it's pretty much you can apply it to literally anything in life. But he talks a lot about that momentum too. It's like, yeah, like like sure you can surrender to nature and like and what is it, like the boat will kind of move with the wind and the waves, but it needs to start moving for you to be able to steer. So that's where he talks about momentum, right? Like having movement is what will allow you to then try to steer. And it doesn't mean that it will go exactly where you want to go, because you still have to fend with the wind and the waves and whatever happens, but at least you are in a relationship then, right? You are steering in relation to what nature is giving you versus just being at the mercy waiting to see if the boat will float somewhere. So I thought that was interesting when you're talking about momentum. Like I guess there's something there too about willingness to do things without having a expectation, I guess, of what will come out, or not assigning any value to it, maybe. Not like, oh, this is going to be good or this is going to be bad, but it's just like, this is going to be probably weird, and that's fine.
But as you were speaking, now I almost felt anxiety for being the beginner on the storm. That just doesn't feel safe, right? If you connect it to like the going with the momentum of the winds and the storms, but you're a beginner, you know nothing.
That's why I think people are always paired in a way with mentors or with someone who knows, right?
It's just bringing me back to being on the trail, and like I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And first 3 weeks, I like fell down a snow hill. I fell into a river, got swept away for a bit. I mean, there were multiple. Oh my God, Old Snowy Mountain. Lost the trail. All this hubris too. Like that's okay, I can do it. Like but that's interesting because I did kind of need that foolish like pride to an extent, to give that momentum, and then nature kicked my ass. Like I am here by the fucking grace of God. But what that did, I was so thankful to get those lessons, those intense lessons, those huge storms early on, because it humbled me to then. So it was an incredibly quick rate of change, right? Like it was a steep learning curve, a deep lesson. And so there's something beautiful about that in an extent when you are when you are just thrown into the ocean without a lifesaver, you learn a lot quicker, and it's also very discombobulating. It's also kind of traumatic, to not to, I know that word's overused a lot, but so it's like rate of change. Either you kind of get the nice gradual slowly learning scaffolding, or you get the like getting thrown deep into the deep really fast, and they both have their benefits and dangers to them.
Yeah, evolution comes directly to mind. There's
Yeah.
multiple strategies for being the most adaptable, and it's never going to be a certain thing, just like we were talking about with relevance realization, or relevance, sorry. Relevance is not just one thing, because every moment relevance changes. Right now, my hand's relevant. Is my hand relevant? It's relevant. So like that's how whether or not this is an adaptable strategy to use or not is relevant. Is like, are things flowing? Are you pushing? Like you have to really like be constantly in like, strategic mode. And that also includes things like meditation and opening yourself up. And that's strategic. Like, why do we do that practice every day? Because I'm training my patterns of recognition so that, okay, now when I look out into the world, what do I see? Things that are relevant, things that are adaptable, whether or not I should be looking at my feet or looking at the top of the mountain, or, going out when I don't know what to do, or, and taking that risk, or staying where I am and things are stagnant and nothing's changing. And, what am I doing? So those are because I'm thinking about when I did the whitewater rafting, I thought I was going to be a raft guide. That almost killed me twice. And then I told them, I said, the Titanic took off on April 10th, 1914, which is April 10th, my birthday. And I was like, you guys should call me the Titanic. And I definitely sunk. So it was appropriate. I hope that they still call me that. But that was one of those where I was just like, super full, I mean, that was not a job for me. Those kids were like 18, 19, throwing these rafts right up on their shoulders. And I was like, having trouble even doing the swim test because the water was too cold for me. So there's certain things that, even when you test it out, you find out, yep, that's not the thing. But the only way I would have known is to go and do it and to survive it. That's very important.
Yeah, that's the danger of those steep learning curves. That David White says we have to learn how to hazard ourselves to the right dangers, right? And so this is why, again, like rites of passage and initiation are really important to us culturally, which we don't really have so much anymore, because they have well, I don't want to use the word container, but it's designed intentionally to hazard us in the right ways, to where we are pushed towards our deep edge, but there's also the opportunity there's the mentoring, like you said, was noting, and there's sort of it's designed in a way to prevent that disastrous death situation as well as possible, to get as close to death as possible without actually slipping on to the other side. And unfortunately, again, in our culture, there's so few of those beautifully intentioned, designed rites of passage that people just have to learn how to. And that's why we've lost a lot of people, and we have zombies, anyways, I'll leave it there.
Got something, Lizelle?
Well, when Isa was saying that's why we need mentors, I was like, exactly what Holly's saying, but we don't really, do we? And if we do, it is just by the grace of God. If we happen to stumble upon someone who has walked the path and knows how to lead us. But like Holly, I'm like, you didn't have a mentor, right? You walked alone.
I walked alone, but I certainly didn't walk alone in another way. I mean, I had obviously I had all this like Zen practice too. So like I had this ability to stay with discomfort. I had already been practicing that. And then of course, like the many, many hands, you get these, what they call trail angels. You get I had people at home that were helping me all along the way. But yeah, when you're out like in the storm and it's just me and this like, 60-mile-an-hour wind, there's no mentor, you know, you're out there doing it on your own.
And the thunderstorm you were recording, for me, that's still the scariest part. Like that, like,
Scary.
I mean, it is a miracle that you survived.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I have to now. I think I'm itching to say. So yeah, the mentors aren't there when the things are happening. That's the thing. But that's why you infuse yourself with the mentor prior to it, and that's like the practices and the procedures. So what I want to get to is the grandmother hypothesis, which is this very interesting thing about why do women hang around post reproductive? That was like, it was like, well, what's the whole point? Like, why, if you're not reproducing, because the point of life is reproducing. Sorry, that's biology. That's just, if you're moving your genes into the future, it has to do with whether or not you're reproducing. However, in these kinds of collectives, we are able to influence the genetic makeup, the genetic code, by how we nurture and how we care for the individuals that are advancing into the future, because then they can model that behavior. So what's interesting about this grandmother hypothesis is that the idea is that menopause happens because you need women around to teach, to care, to, when everybody goes out to hunt and everybody goes out to collect berries, who's hanging back with the kids, who's teaching them. And then Holly said, to get so close to death. And it reminds me of how every time I'm interacting with my grandma, anytime anybody's interacting with an elder, that person is much closer to death. So when you're talking to them, all of their experiences, you're talking to them and they're closest to death. Every moment you talk to them, it's getting closer and closer and closer. That fear that we have of dying, like the storm is scary because we could die in it. So then what's afforded to us by interacting with elders, mentors, and all these people is you're at least alleviating some of the fear. So that's kind of what I feel is like, it's important to engage and to participate with the mentors, with the elders, and like, not, I don't know, and even all the elders that you've experienced already, all of those lessons come up in these kinds of things. So we don't have to necessarily have the person there with us in order for us to be successful, but the training is what's important.
Yeah, because I feel like the thing with having the person there, I think especially the way, I don't know, we've been schooled and how we relate to experts and people like that, is that we might default into expecting them to do the problem or them to tell us how to do it, and then we just repeat the same thing. And yeah, I suspect that any mentor or any person that cares about teaching would, instead of like expecting their students or their friends to do the same thing, you just kind of release something, and you see what they catch and then how they transform that, right? So it's always like, you're not just passing a ball along, you're like completely transforming this thing as it goes. So that's why, like, yeah, in that moment where like, yeah, you get the glimpses of those conversations or whatever, and it might not even come up, it might come up as an instinct, like as a movement, as a thing. And then you're taking what you were giving and also what you have right now, this context, and making something new.
It reminds me of what John calls internalizing the sage.
Yeah, Bonnie talks about ingression, right? And so, especially when you come into contact with a wise elder, they become ingressed in you. They become a part of your inner landscape. And this is also bringing up the hexagram for me of youthful folly from the I Ching 4, I believe. And in that they talk about how it's like the youthful folly is a young one who is actually seeking the elder, and that actually the marker of kind of a wise good teacher. And Stephen Jenkinson has talked about this too, of you don't become an elder until you're asked. So it's actually like it's the student in that momentum that you was sort of pointing to, and that energy, then that the teacher is sort of there, and then it's the teach. It's not the teach in the hexagram they talk about. It's not like the teacher's duty to go and find students and say, you know, but it's up for them to be open and present for someone to approach them and say, I want to learn from you. So there's something too about that. When I read the youthful folly, when I get that hexagram, you know, it's like find the people you resonate with, find the elders, the teachers you want to learn from, and you approach them, you ask them, and it's the way to do it.
I think in the same one, he may even caution to not get too attached to one one leader, one mindset. Like, you want to keep the council of sages and embody all of those, because if you get stuck on fixated on one, and then you're just doing what Isa was saying, you're just passing the same ball along. So it's got to be that mystical ball that she was showing us that I really liked.
I also had to really smile while you were speaking, Isa, because the moon is very dark tonight. I was just seeing hands moving around.
Oh.
So he was pretty much hidden. At least on my screen. Maybe my screen is just dark also because of the sun shining in my eyes.
Oh, that's even better. The sun is
Blinding you.
blinding the mood.
I was getting chills actually when Isa was talking about going off into the like void, so to speak. That if you stay in that sacred space, then you're not, you don't have a form, you don't have a body, you become part of the no thing soup. And that's really interesting because I had just like this week I read from Bonnie's thesis actually about an experience that she had just like that, which coordinates with another near-death experience that guy Martin Pratchell, who I really like, also describes in their description of going off into that sacred no thing space is like so eerily similar. And I feel called to read it. So I wonder, because like this is the passage that I found from Bonnie's thesis that really is totally touching what Isa was saying, and like, so let me read it. She said, during a 13-day period of radical transformation, I didn't fall asleep at all. Instead, I would lie down and fall into deep relaxation. Soon I would witness my body going into sleep paralysis. I could look for my limbs, my head, my pelvis, but could not find them anywhere. As the feeling of the physical body disappeared, consciousness seemed free-floating. Keeping my eyes open, I was immersed in deep blackness, which I could not determine was the darkness inside the room or the blackness behind my eyes. Either way, the blackness was strange, because usually some faint light can be seen through the windows, or some virtual imagery is active behind one's eyes. By contrast, this was complete darkness, very still. The void eventually would become more and more spacious, and tiny little specks of light particles were flickering. I would say, though, that only about 1 to 2% of the area was occupied by these tiny particles. Most of the space was a dark void. The greatest impression of this void is that it was a 360-degree dimensional and expanding into ever-increasing dimensional space. There were no objects that could be used as reference to this dimensionality. The impression of dimensionality was given by this movement of expansion into spherical space. My consciousness seemed to expand with it. It was as if I were a particle of light that I could not, of course, see. A tiny speck of awareness flickering in a great sea of expanding void. Most of the experiences were affectively neutral, but one evening, this expansion into infinite void was accompanied by an increasing feeling of bliss, of freedom. The further my awareness expanded, the more bliss, the more freedom. Going out to forever became a subtle goal, a probable destination. Then the body called me back. I heard a very faint, childlike voice, way back down from where I had come, calling me to reoccupy the physical body, so she, the body child, would not die. I experienced this as a profound spiritual choice. Absolute freedom and bliss on the one side, and guaranteed suffering on the other. I realized the bodhisattva commitment to embodiment for the benefit of all sentience. And so I returned. This was the 13th and final evening of my most radical transformative journey. I had come back for good.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot there. I listened to, I don't even remember who it was anymore, but I know I listened to someone interviewing this guy who's done most of his research on people who've had near-death experiences. And so much overlap with what you just said as well. So much about going out of their body, and yeah, so many anecdotes of like people seeing things that they possibly could have not seen from their body, and knowing things that they could not possibly know if their senses were limited to just this. So that's interesting. But the other thing that makes me, I guess it's stuck to me because I've been having those sort of conversations and thoughts these days. Like, I think last night or 2 nights ago, I was having a really, really rough time. And I was like, in all these stories, like, oh, this is happening because this and that. And like, my mom and my grandpa and the trees. And like, you can always find like some story as to why things are happening. And at this, at some point, I hit this realization was like, but I'm trying to justify pain. I'm trying to like find reasons why I deserve it, or if I did something wrong to deserve pain, or if I did something wrong to inflict it, and linking pain to punishment or shame or just something negative in general. And then at some point it hit me as like, I don't think so. I think pain is just fucking pain. And it's not something that you earn or that you deserve, or it's not good or bad. It's just kind of part of the deal of being human. Um, and that helped a lot. It hasn't like I'm still kind of going through those waters, but that helped a lot. Kind of like yeah, not making suffering into something that is linked to a story or even your own narrative of life, but kind of this, like she said, it's a guarantee. You know that it's a guarantee and that it's part of the being alive deal, then it helps. I think at least it helped me.
Yeah, I sense that the acceptance and awareness of it is it's being. That is exactly what being is. So yeah, feeling the weight of my body and things interacting with it, causing my nerves to send messages to each other. That's all part of just the experience here. And I think we've talked in an awakening series about that, like reframing that suffering too. But I don't really remember where we went with it now. So I don't know if that brings up anything for you, Lizelle.
It's one of the first couple of episodes where John talks of Buddhism and all is dukkha, which we normally translate as all is suffering. I think it's dukkha, right, Ollie? He says it's what is it? He says it's like passion, but the real meaning of passion. like
Right.
undergoing.
Just to, I don't know, maybe this will connect back to the Fool, but when you guys mentioned mania earlier, I thought it was interesting because literally yesterday I was looking up the etymology of mania, and it has the same root as passion.
The origin of the word passion, to suffer, to be acted on. Passion, suffering, to suffer is a term used to denote strong and intractable or barely controllable emotion or inclination with respect to a particular person or thing. And then on the etymology, of course, they mentioned the suffering of Christ, and the sense was extended to the sufferings of martyrs and suffering and pain generally. To endure, undergo, experience.
The word that's coming up for me is longing. Like as long as we're something and alive, there will always be a kind of longing, a longing to home, a longing. I just notice like when I go into some really dark places, it's like I'm just longing. I'm longing to be held by that like void, like this dark mother's arms. Like that's just the image that comes up for me. It's like this black void, but it's the arms of my mother, like my great mother, and and so it was just interesting, like when I sit with, or when I can be with that, that's what that is. It's a longing to be held by that, to go home to that. And then sometimes the suffering is it's a longing to know who I am or what I can be or what the potential is. You know, there's a deep longing of like what's possible, to know what's possible. And yeah, I appreciate especially that what you're saying about Vervaeke's interpretation of it being kind of a passion, that helps it again move it out of the victim status and the blaming status, and what he's so saying of it being tied to some sort of morality, you know, but that it's just part of this deep longing that is part of being something in this world.
Oh, there's so much. I hope I'm able to express it. What really struck me, Holly, from the passage you read, it's beautiful, and that choice at the end to come back. I think that's the difference between suffering and suffering, if you know what I mean. It's, and that longing, I don't know if I've told you. I hardly speak about it because I'm not sure if I can. But my initiation as priestess of Sophia in Istanbul was exactly that. I got really sick, and I just went into the dark, into the void completely. It felt like nothing, and it was blissful. It was so peaceful. That it was that being held by the dark mother. And then my friend literally called me back, and I had to make a choice. Do I want to stay in the void or return to my friend and to life? And I chose her. I chose life. And to me, that's the initiation. That was the moment of initiation. Choosing to come back. And I'm not saying I'm not regretting it. But there is a difference between, because what did I choose? What do we choose when we embrace the suffering of life? We choose to go out on the stormy seas as beginners, as fools, as people who don't know how to navigate. And that's scary and terrifying and painful and everything that goes along with it. But That's the courage of being human.
There's something here about I'm thinking of Zach Stein's model of pre-tragic, tragic, and post-tragic. And Lizelle talking about like the fool at the beginning and then the fool at the end. I kind of think, I mean, after an experience like that, and thank you so much for sharing that with us. It's so beautiful, really moving. You know, you make that choice. If you make that choice to return, like when I think about Bonnie, she is very much the fool, and I think she's the fool because she's the post-tragic fool, like because she's touched that place. It feels like all these freedoms then get opened up, all these affordances do get opened up because you kind of, there's more ability to take risks because you know it's kind of just a game in some ways. You know that this is like here for us to play in, and it's we're going to return to that, and so touch into that space allows one to act more of a fool because you just know that it's like the serious play. You know, of course it's deeply serious. Like to come back, the Bodhisattva's vow, I'm coming back to suffer and I'm coming back to help people wake up, to help people along the path. And you know, whatever. It's like, you know, you can kind of, if you know it's just kind of a game, you just have a lot more freedom to do weird things and fun things and wild things. So, but then there's the pre-tragic fool who doesn't know that part of suffering yet, you know, the beginning, who's like, oh yeah, like, yeah, I can walk through this storm. I'm really strong. I've been working out. Like, I got it, you know? And then it's like, oh, yeah, no, never arm wrestle with nature. You're going to lose every time. So I also like, I like juxtaposing the pre-tragic fool who just has that very youthful adolescent energy that's like, I can do whatever I want because the world's my oyster. And then the post-tragic who's like, no, I've brushed up against death. I know suffering really well. And I can be foolish because I know how to be a proper fool now. You know, I know how to properly be foolish.
That's the thing, right? Is like, how do you brush against death and then that doesn't become an experience that collapses you, right? That doesn't become a thing like, oh, I know all the dangers now, so I'm gonna retreat into my little cocoon. Yeah, that's interesting.
Well, that's what Zach says, like as a culture, we're stuck in the tragic right now. So we haven't moved to post-tragic. So we're in that place of exactly like we're all collapsing. I don't, you know, drowning and I don't know how to get out of this. And yeah, that's I think what I was pointing to or trying to, what you just said of like, that's where we see all these kind of zombies walking around because it's like people still stuck in the adolescence, in the tragedy, like going out and look, we have all this technology and we can do whatever we want. Life's so like, you know, we can just take from the earth all that we want. And like now we're like, oh fuck, like where there's effects of that, you know, there's repercussions based on that. And yeah, exactly. Then what is that? That's a great question. Like, what is that process of maturing, of moving from tragic to post-tragic? And yeah, there's some sort of digging deep or leveling up, as Lizelle was saying. That's an interesting and mysterious question.
Have you guys tried DMT? I figured I'd quote Joe Rogan. But seriously, like that molecule is released. Why do you think people experiment with it? You really do sense that dissociation. I'm not advocating for drug use, but mushrooms as well. These kinds of dissociative drugs that open your brain up to insight. That's how, personally, I think we could potentially at least open people up to insight. And it doesn't have to happen with the use of substances. This can be part of, meditative practices, these kinds of things. The problem is, and you said zombies, so then that's the other side of it, is like, oh, people are getting attached to drugs that don't open them up to insight, that continue to spiral them down into addiction and closing. instead of opening them up. So it's interesting, isn't it, that the drugs that open us up are the ones that are highly illegal, and the ones that close us down are the ones that or move us into addiction, I should say, because you've got uppers and downers doing that. But those ones that they can profit off of, and especially if they can get people addicted to them, those are the ones that they have no problem distributing. So yeah.
And I have a, this makes me think also, when was it at the Stoa? I don't remember the guy who writes Get Things Done. I think David Allen is his name. Something Allen. I don't remember his name. But he said that also in an interview, like he wrote that book, or he kind of started getting that insight about all this like productivity methods at a point in time where everyone was doing a lot of drugs, and a lot of those insightful drugs. And he said the reason he didn't go that way is because he very quickly realized that, at least for him, yes, the drugs give me the vision of reality. They don't let me meet reality. And that's what the problem was for him, is like, I just want to go and be like a spectator of reality, or do I actually want to find a way to carve it and make it happen? And I think maybe it's just different kinds of people. I think there are people that can definitely get like that epiphany or that insight, and it's completely groundbreaking, and it's like a fucking lightning, and it changes your life. And I think there's people, and I think I'm in that group, where that doesn't work for me. Watch me get an epiphany tomorrow and become a new person. But I think that's what we don't know how to do. That's what you need a fool to try to like bang some things around and see if one of those does something.
I am very wary of artificial means. And that's why I'm really glad that the mother got me so sick that I had the experience by nature, by her hand. But yeah, but I'm also, Sarah, I've been thinking, we also talked of John's higher states of consciousness, and how people, when they have that, often have like life-altering experiences, and then something becomes autonormativity, I think is the word that he uses. See, me and Sarah have learned a lot of big words. Zach Stein is really, really attracting me very, very much. But what I've been wondering, and maybe I should ask John, but on the one hand, he says these experiences that we have when we're in altered states, whether it's caused by nature, well, plants are also nature, so that's also nature. Whatever it's caused by, we cannot say that propositionally whatever we experience there is true, because some people come out of the state and say, now I know that there is a God. And other people come out of the state and say, now I know that there is no God. So there's mixed messages. So that's the one hand. And on the other hand, he says it becomes autonormative to people. But then I assume the answer is obviously something, but not propositionally autonormative. But still, it feels like, how do you rearrange your life according to an experience you had if you can't really trust the experience? Mm-hmm. That feels like, okay, foolish, or bullshitting yourself in a very deep level. Which brings me back to what I said in our last recording, Sarah, the connection between being foolish and self-transcendence, how close that is. Like maybe sometimes we need to risk bullshitting ourselves for self-transcendence.
Otherwise, we think we have control over the whole thing, right?
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
That would be foolish.
Control over the whole thing, or the absolute opposite. No control over anything, nothing really matters.
Right.
Not everything is whatever it is, so yeah.
And then that might be the solution to dukkha, like acknowledging the agency you do have,
Mm-hmm.
limited though it might be.
Well, as you always say, choose your loves instead of choose your suffering. I think that's really important. Like you can experience love in all that, and like maybe it hurts a lot once that love has to eventually end. It always does. And you go into that as the evolved fool or the 22 card, where you are actually going in it knowing that this is going to hurt. What am I going to choose to hurt for? That's the big question.
I think there's a thing I want to distinguish here between like control and choice, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, when Bonnie talks about the difference in talking about like taming stallions and the difference between a young, wild, immature stallion and a more mature stallion, is that the mature stallion has choice to come back to ground, so to speak. So the stallion has the choice of like, oh, being stallion, putting that energy out there, going full force. But then there's also the choice when that's not appropriate to come back, right? To settle, to come back to ground. And it's just interesting. She also talks about when you were talking, Sarah, about like choices and things that can hurt. That she was talking about being like a pawn on a chessboard and feeling like a queen on a chessboard, and choosing like getting to see the landscape and then getting to choose what's the next move that I can make. So how do you know which move is the right move to make? And she said, you make the move that helps the other or world disclose what they're trying to disclose. So then which like I'm still playing with this. I'm like, oh, okay. So my move is to help whatever's in front of me disclose whatever it is they're trying to disclose, which takes a lot of me out of the equation and to an extent, or like what I, like it's kind of beautiful because it's there's that humbling aspect of it, or it brings other into a much deeper intimacy, I think.
Mm. Yes, I do want to presence you as a Capricorn, though, has the distinct desire to completely eliminate themselves and only be responsible for others. So don't completely eliminate you when you do acknowledge other people in you. But yeah, I get it. That's
It is also our job to help you.
I was aware of it while I was speaking. I was like, no, I'm part of it. I'm part of it. I think, but that's where I sometimes get tortured because like, what do I want? And it's like, no, also bring in. It's like, it doesn't have. That's where I know my own neuroses can come in because it's like I make it so intensely about me to an extent. But yes, thank you for pointing that out.
That also reminds me of improv too.
Yeah.
Of the same thing. This is like the right reaction or position in a situation is letting whatever you receive change you, and then being able to give something that is changeable. So it's that same thing. Like there's a lot less of like, what is the right thing, or what do I want to say, or what is the story I want to tell. Like, you cannot go on a stage with a agenda of, today I'm going to tell this story. Like, today, this is today where I tell you, oh guys, about all my traumas. Prepare. Like, no. So that reminded me of that. And the other thing I was thinking, I think agency really struck me. Actually, I went to fetch my ring because this one, I think I showed you guys, this one opens up and it has like a secret compartment, and it won't show in camera, but there's a little paper in there, and it's for agency.
Oh, cool. Do you have a sigil for that, Lisa? Do you have a sigil for agency? You do.
Yeah,
Nice.
it's the last one I made. Yeah, when I had my
Share it on the text.
my big embassy appointment, because I felt like, well, today I need agency because no matter what happens, I need to feel like I have a choice. But yeah, it reminds me of, because we talk about passion and how passion is also the root for passive. And how, yeah, like I don't know if it's a matter of framing, but just going from seeing passivity, again, me just talking right now about like how improv is so much about being open to being changed by whatever you received. So you are being passive because you're receiving, but you're also active in the sense that you're taking something and transforming it. So it's like earlier, Sarah, when you were talking about like you're splitting the passion you receive versus the passion you execute. It feels to me like there's something in joining those. I think there's a key there. Like I don't know how, but realizing that yeah, there's like this active passivity, or I don't know how to call it, but like how I feel like it's the same. I think I always remember somewhere that the root, like the Proto-Indo-European something something word for give and receive is the same,
Mhm.
right? So it's this thing like, oh, giving and receiving is part of the same action. It's kind of the same thing. When you're giving, you're receiving. When you're receiving, you're giving. And it's only when we like put time in between and like make this delta in between them that we create enough distance to make them apparently separate things, but at the root they're the same. And I think they even have the same hand. I think the word for hand is at the root of it because I think it's so, I mean, it's pretty I think easy to imagine that give and receive came from hand. But yeah, but there's something about like giving and receiving is the same thing, but we have expanded things in a way that we put time in between them, so we separated these actions into different time frames, and that's why we see them as separate, but they're actually the same. I think there's something there also about agency and passive slash activity that feel like they can be the same, and we only see them separate because we've created like we've kind of dispersed diluted time in a way. um but yeah, that word seems important to me right now.
Well, it's group improv, right? You
Yeah.
give and receive when you do, and that is life. I want to share something, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind. He might mind that I'm sharing it with words that's not as good as his. But Ryan, in our last dialectic or dialogos, it was dialogos completely, talked about an orchestra and how the conductor, if it's a good conductor, manages to incorporate even the crying baby in the auditorium with the whole song that is playing, and how that is also based on receiving and giving, or listening and project, that suffering or passion being done to, but also doing in the same gesture. It's like you're so aware of everything around you that you're capable of incorporating it in this beautiful song type of thing. And that's what I hear when you speak like that. It's and then he said, and that is exactly when there's dissonance, when we think there's something that is out of tune with this song that we are conducting, that is actually only a call to level up, go to the higher level, so that it can also fit into the rhythm of it all.
I like that too. I like that too. Just to, again, I guess this book felt impactful, but there's another part where he talks about how at some point he was gonna like conduct this workshop teaching people some exercises, and he was freaking out because he was like, oh, what if it doesn't work out? And his friend was like, is it possible for it not to work out? And he's like, yeah, they could, maybe they won't get the game. And it's like, well, it just means it didn't work out the way you thought it would work out. It doesn't mean it didn't work out. It just worked out in a different way. They made up their own game. So it's the same. I think that conductor is making their own game. They're not saying, oh, my game is this piece that needs to play perfectly however I think I can imagine it, which is already probably limited because our brains, I don't think we can perfectly imagine a piece played by a full orchestra. But he's saying, no, I'll be there, and what I will do is just engage with my players, with the temperature of the room, with the stomachache I have because I had bad leftovers from last night, this morning, and from the baby crying in the back. And yeah, that's it. He's making a new game every time.
Yeah, I'm hearing allowing things to come through, allowing whatever to come through. And it's almost like that kenosis of the conductor.
Because how explicitly stated then, how do we connect agency to the Fool?
That's what I've been thinking about.
So what I was wondering is like, this is like the still picture of the Fool. So this is like where, like, this is where it starts. Like the Fool, now we progress past this point. So like we see this card and that isn't, it isn't still, it isn't stuck. So everything after this is the story unfolding. And I think that's the whole thing, is just like pick your ending. That was the, like those kinds of books where you're in the book and it's like turn to page 54. Okay, let me get there. It's kind of like that.
But we don't really pick our ending. We just divert towards an ending that's already there, but which is then based on our decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the whole problem is this, like trying to control the outcome, confusing that indeed as wholly with choice, control and choice.
Yeah, it just reminds me that we all go to the same place. We're all walking each other home. And so the ending is very apparent. We all know how this ends. And so what path do we take to get there is what I think the Fool is asking. Or blindly walking through.
Well, I think that's what he was saying. Like, if we all know that we're going to the same place, then, as a fool, what would you do? Just take like a weird ass detour, run around, camp somewhere, make a cult probably.
Like I'm thinking like all the life paths that are just so you have kids, or you go to college, you have kids, like that whole thing, that whole setup of this is what your life could look like, the little boxes, that isn't what the Fool is for.
Oh, it's interesting. I just had this very strong image because I'm not entirely sure why. I guess my own upbringing and my own context, but I guess growing up in a place where there was still this very strong image that, oh, you need to get a man, like that's the thing. There was so much focus on like women being extremely manicured and your beauty is all that matters so you can get a man. And I remember, it's funny because now I see the Fool. I remember very specifically feeling and telling people that I think I had this resistance to get into any sort of relationship. Because I felt like, okay, then if I get the guy, then that means I'm dead. That means I can literally jump off a cliff because I've like life complete, right? And I remember using that exact word, like that I can walk off a cliff because I don't have anything else to live for then, if this is all there is to life. So it's interesting. It's interesting because that's our Fool there walking off a cliff.
What's also interesting, it's the 0 card, right? And then 0 kind of goes back into that void space. All possibility. The void being anything's also possible. All things come from there. So it's matrix from which anything can happen. And then back to these sort of near-death experiences we touched on, of choosing to live, you know. So maybe that's part of the agency, the choice of the Fool is choosing life, walking back to zero.
Just like a nice tortuous detour. What is it? Gravity and time and space. Okay, let's let's see what I can do with this.
Yeah, I just want to like my probably like last thought on it is just that it is the idea that the predetermined path is our choice from the beginning. God gives us the agency to make that choice in heaven, and then we're sent down with our daimon or our guides and our spirit, watchers, and they're like, okay, you chose this thing that you said you wanted to do, so now we're here to just keep you on that path. And I love that image of just like, okay, fine, I picked this shit. These guys are here to help me, and that gives me, we were talking about mentors and things like that. I think we always have our guides and our spirits with us, and so that's at least something to make levity out of the
Yeah.
death
And the
conversation.
diamond totally going like, oh, for fuck's sake, not again.
I do have to say, Sarah, you have just quoted the divine Plato himself. From the Republic, Book 10, The Myth of that is what it's about. That's where we find it.
Thank you
first.
for that. In true Vervaekian fashion, you have the citation locked and loaded and to the exact place.
And that's, I've heard that proposed as like a crisis is exactly what Sarah's talking. Crisis is like you've gotten off the path. Like, yeah, like you're going this way and you really need to be going that way. And so crisis is actually our guides, our angels, waking us up of like, you're going, come back over here, which, that gives more of that kind of amor fati, that sort of more like, so when those difficult situations hit, it becomes more like, oh, like, well, you get curious and excited about it, because maybe you if you can keep that alive, keep that idea alive, then you realize like, oh, it's gearing me, it's moving me actually more towards where there's flow and where there's alignment and harmony, and it's our disposition, our attitude is everything. And so there's something, the Fool is so beautiful. His attitude is so it's so full of possibility and excitement. He's on the edge of the cliff, and he's not afraid. He's just, he's not looking too. There's that piece of it, but yeah, our attitude shapes everything. It shapes the world around us, so we can hopefully conjure the Fool when these things happen and go, no, this is moving me towards something, a bigger, leveling me up. It's moving me towards a bigger version of myself that I haven't. I'm too small for myself right now. I need to grow bigger. So
that's the thing. Is he not looking because he's that distracted and foolish, or is he not looking because he trusts that he is where he has to be?
Yeah, and he's got a little dog with him too. Forget that. He's got a dog. He's got some help. So.
And sometimes maybe we need to fall off the cliff to reach our destiny, however painful that might be.
Yeah, I've had this weird vision dream. Haven't had it in a while, but I used to have it where I was at this like kind of ledge area, and all I can see is like this entrance to a cave, this big kind of copper monolith on the ledge, and then the cliff. And I've had that vision so many times, and it always feels to me like, okay, well, what are my options? Like, do I go into the cave tunnel thing? Do I try to climb this monolith, or do I jump off the cliff? And I've always wondered, like, or maybe it's none of those three, but I've always wondered, like, I feel inclined to believe that it's jumping off the cliff, but I'm not sure.
Well, you got your man now, so I say jump.
Yeah.
Hopefully you choose to come back, Issa. I hope. I hope you choose to come back for our
It'll be a
sake.
soft landing on the.
I hope you hear our voices calling you back.
I miss Rebecca.
Oh.
Hmm?